You're listening to CLE Rocks, the music podcast from the birthplace of rock and roll. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Now, on with the show.
You wanted us best, but you got the best. The hottest band in the world, Kiss!
Come on! There was nothing quite like Kiss and the band's painted-faced, wild rock and roll spectacle of a live show that ruled over much of the 1970s. But in 1978, on the epic Alive 2 tour, Kiss hit a roadblock, or better yet, a blizzard. The concert, held at Richfield Coliseum that January, would prove legendary both for Kiss being at the peak of its powers and for the massive amount of snow fans had to navigate. On this episode of CLE Rocks, Gene Simmons, Kiss historians, and the Kiss Army who were there tell the story of the Kiss Blizzard of '78 concert, a lively showcase that kickstarted one of the craziest winters in Ohio history.
Hello, Cleveland!
Kiss's origins date back to the early 1970s and Wicked Lester, a New York City band led by Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. Looking to form a new project, the duo first came across veteran New York City drummer Peter Criss. An impressive audition from a lead guitarist named Ace Frehley would eventually round out Kiss's classic lineup in 1973. David Leaf, co-author of the authorized biography Kiss Behind the Mask, remembers the band's humble beginnings.
What I understand is they started like every group probably ever started. You know, let's start a group and get girls. You know, and the story of my talking to them was interesting because Peter had like a I don't know, Bronx or Brooklyn accent. I mean, it was definitely a borough accent, and that surprised me. What else did I learn about Peter? He didn't want to tell me what year he was born. You know, at the time I didn't understand why that mattered, but now I understand how important it is to be young in rock and roll, or young in whatever music or world you're in. Ace was, you know, interesting to say the least. Gene was just so sharp. I mean, he clearly was, you know, is it right to say running the show from the business side of things? And Paul, from my point of view, watching them, Paul was the star.
Kiss's first 3 albums, released on Casablanca Records, weren't huge successes, though 1975's Dressed to Kill did feature the future hit Rock and Roll All Night. More importantly, though, Kiss was earning a reputation for its impressive live shows.
She'll adore you, and she'll blow you with her wisdom and ambition. And you'll love it, and think of it, till you lose all intuition. Come on!
The members hit the stage in their signature face paint and elaborate stage outfits. The production value seemed to grow with each show. Criss would perform on an elevating drum riser. Frehley's guitar would burst into flames during his thrilling solos. Simmons would spit blood and breathe fire. Stanley would prove to be one of rock's greatest frontmen, oozing charisma as pyrotechnics exploded around him.
Clearly, the genius of it was they had created these characters, and they were going to be these characters. It's not like, you know, we've seen, you know, David Bowie and Madonna and Lady Gaga, and they have different personae based on where they are at that point in their career. I mean, David Bowie was David Bowie underneath it all, but sometimes he was the thin white duke, right? And sometimes he was on his way to outer space. There was no question who they were. So it was like a Marvel comic book come to life in a rock and roll band.
In 1975, Kiss finally achieved its breakthrough in the form of its first live album titled Alive. The record went gold, with a live version of Rock and Roll All Night reaching the top 20 on the charts. Destroyer, still considered by many to be Kiss's greatest studio album, followed in 1976. The single Detroit Rock City would become the band's biggest radio hit to date. Kiss would release 2 more albums within 15 months of Destroyer. By the time the dust had settled on 1977's Love Gun, the group's highest charting album yet, Kiss had become one of the biggest bands in the world. Dennis Wallach was along for the entire ride as art director for as many as 20 of Kiss's albums.
The people were just ready for it. Also, Kiss appealed very much, I think, to the younger guys out there, the younger set. I mean, 13 to 15-year-olds kind of. The older rock and roll fans and critics thought Kiss sucked. These guys, what is this? This is stupid. What is this stupid stuff on their face? What are their outfits they're wearing? They're trying to distract from the fact that they can't play and that they're lousy musicians. And they used to refer to bands back in the day, if you recall, if they didn't think they had a lot of ability, but they looked the part like rock and roll, they call them a hair band, right? They're just a hair band. So, Kiss was kind of like a hair band, except, to the extreme. But the guys in Kiss, to give them the credit that they deserve, they had a vision for themselves. They saw Alice Cooper, and they saw the New York Dolls, who wore makeup, and Alice had some makeup, not a lot, but he had a little bit. But he was kind of over the top. He tried to do a show that was theatrical, more or less. He tried to, he had a snake, right? And Kiss wanted to give them a show. The whole idea was, who wants to pay whatever dollars it was at the time to go see a big rock and roll concert and watch a bunch of guys up there with ripped T-shirts and sneakers playing? That's not visually exciting. You can listen to the music, yeah. But I want to see something. I want to see a show. So they knew the visual aspect was at least half the fun of going to see them. Gene was a big sci-fi fan and a monster horror fan. That had a lot to do with their image, his image especially. So they wanted to give people their money's worth, basically, and they wound up, appealing to generations of fans. I mean, you have people now that saw them in 74, 75, let's say. If you were 15 or 16 or 18 at that time, how old are you now, 45 years later? You've got grandchildren, and those grandchildren are Kiss fans.
After wrapping up its Love Gun tour in September 1977, Kiss transitioned into the Alive 2 tour, following the release of its second live album that October. Kiss was now at its commercial peak, with merchandise flying off the shelves to the tune of $100 million a year. Membership for the Kiss Army, the band's fan club, was said to be well over the 100,000 mark. Ken Sharp, Kiss fanatic and co-author of Behind the Mask, remembers there being a camaraderie among Kiss fans, many of whom were outcasts that found solace in loving something different from the norm.
Growing up and going to junior high and high school, I was, known as kind of the Kiss freak, and there were a lot of people in my school that didn't like the band, so I would get harassed and things like that, and got into fights over it, which is kind of crazy thinking about it now, but when you went to a Kiss show and you went once a year, say it was the Alive 2 show, there was this great feeling of connection and a feeling of communal sharing experience that, wow, you're here in an arena with 18,000 other people that understand, you know what I mean, that aren't beating you up in junior high or high school, that really get it. And that was also a really incredible experience just to share in that joy and that communal love of the band from the audience.
Everybody's gonna move their feet. Get down. Everybody's gonna leave their seat. You gotta lose your mind in Detroit, Rock City. Get up. Everybody's gonna move their feet. Get down. Everybody's gonna leave their seat. Getting late. I just can't wait.
Fittingly, the Alive 2 tour would feature Kiss's most elaborate production yet. Gene Simmons remembers how much effort went into that run.
You got to remember that we were bringing in more pyro and stuff like that, and, it was easier to be in the Eagles. God bless them. You show up with it's a peaceful, easy feeling. Bring your acoustic guitars, you don't have to worry about anything. And, a tip of the hat to the great songwriting and singing in that band. It's got nothing to do with that. I'm saying it's easier to be in the Eagles than it is in Kiss. That also includes how many shows we blew out their power because we had too much power on stage. And how many conversations we'd have at every single show with the fire marshal at every show. And other bands, none of the other bands had to do any of that, or wear 7-inch platform heels, or by that time be wearing, 40 pounds of armor, studs, and all that stuff, and have to spit fire. And hardest working band in show business, other than the glory days of James Brown.
The show would feature explosions, smoke bombs, drum and platform risers, a massive dragon logo, confetti, and dual staircases with fire surrounding them. It's a setup captured perfectly in the gatefold for Alive 2, perhaps the most iconic image of a Kiss show, second only to the cover of the first Alive album, which Wallach says was the intention.
Yeah, that was absolutely the idea. Wanted to show as much as we could in a photograph what the show is like. And, of course, it was their second live album, so it made sense. The first live album, we didn't have that sort of forethought. Also, the first live album, that tour, didn't have as much pyro and what have you. Probably the Kiss side was half the size, et cetera. They didn't have, pneumatic risers that lifted up the drums and Gene and Paul, and all that stuff probably wasn't there for Alive. But by the time Alive 2 came, the stage was really a lot more complicated, a lot more exciting, and so we all decided, sort of collectively, that for this next gatefold, we really should try to show the show in one shot. The thinking behind it was, look, everybody, this is what their show looks like, and the record is going to be what it sounds like.
The set list for the Alive 2 tour was nearly identical to that of the Love Gun tour, swapping out a few new songs here or there. But that didn't stop Kiss's latest tour from being one of the most anticipated of the year. Early shows featured opener AC/DC before the Australian band took off in the United States. Many of the Alive 2 tour shows sold out immediately, including one at the Spectrum in Philadelphia that Sharp attended.
I think it was the height of Kiss Mania. So there was an extreme excitement and hysteria going on around the country, around the world for Kiss. And I think it was something that lived up to the greatest spectacle. Gene Simmons would always talk a bit about, the circus is coming to town and, this is how the big boys do it. But it's actually true back then, especially, besides Alice Cooper, no one had really gone to the extreme in terms of creating these larger-than-life spectacles than Kiss. I mean, it was almost like a Broadway show in terms of, not the music, but in terms of the choreography and the various things that were done. But, there's a DNA that exists in pretty much every rock show today that you can point the dial back to Kiss. Even Paul McCartney in Live and Let Die, there's these tower of, flames that go up at a pivotal part of the song, which is really dramatic, and I'm a huge Beatle fan. But, all that stuff was taken from what Kiss did.
Kiss arrived at the Richfield Coliseum on January 8th, 1978. By that point, the venue was hosting a who's who of rock's elite. Kiss played Richfield in 1976, but this time around, the band was on top of the world. However, that January 8th show would become memorable for something beyond anyone's control: the weather. The winter in Ohio at the end of 1977 had been somewhat mild. In January, all hell broke loose, and it started the night of the Kiss show, remembers concert attendee Larry Cahill.
It took forever to get there. There were already cars off the side of the road because, it was the back roads. It was very hilly getting there, and you kind of had to surf your car up and down. But again, I was a passenger. My buddy was driving, and he had a little, I think it was, he borrowed his sister's Honda Civic. And at that time, all these guys had these, muscle cars from the early 70s and with big engines and rear-wheel drive. So they were all spinning out. We had lots of cars on the side of the road, and he had this little Honda Civic, which was just a tiny little car, but it had front-wheel drive. So we were surfing up and down the hills, passing these other cars that were just struggling to get up and down with the rear-wheel drive cars at the time.
The weather led to Kiss arriving late at the venue, and some of the stage effects were rendered useless. Still, the show was typical Kiss, opening with a fiery performance of I Stole Your Love.
I remember the day that was there. I needed something, you needed something. Yeah. That time taking all you could get, giving yourself something you never.
For the Kiss Army, there was nothing like seeing the band. While Kiss's fame had reached the point of TV specials and late-night appearances, the only way to truly experience Kiss was in a live setting, says Sharp.
It was pretty mind-blowing. If you're really close to the stage, I mean, it was like a supersonic jet. You know, the sound of it, the volume was pretty fierce. And then you add flames and you add smoke bombs and Gene blowing fire and spitting blood and Peter Criss's levitating drum set. And when the guys went up on the risers above the audience, Paul smashing his guitar, Ace's guitar, his smoking guitar, throwing out picks, people diving.
But even as Kiss rocked Richfield, the snow continued to fall, prompting Paul Stanley to deliver a weather report halfway through the show. He informed fans, "It's snowing hard out there." He wasn't kidding. And by show's end, fans were scrambling to find a way out, remembers attendee Dave Kukowski.
I just remember after how horrible the snow was. It had to be a couple feet, easy. And so they were telling everybody, if you got somebody that's supposed to pick you up, please tell them that they cannot get into the entrance because we can't clear it. It's too thick. You have to get your ride to park on 303 as close to the time that you tell them you're going to pick them up. And so I had to call on the phone afterwards and tell my dad, they're not even letting people into the entrance to the parking lot because it's so bad. So just park on 303. And I told him, I said, give us like 20 minutes and we'll just kind of walk out there and then start looking for you.
Kukowski did make it home. He was one of the lucky ones. Many fans were snowed in, forced to stay at local homes, businesses, and even the Coliseum. And that included Kiss, who spent the night at the venue with a few thousand fans, according to Gene Simmons.
But they had the snowstorm of the century, and people literally couldn't leave. Parking lot had feet, 5-6 feet of snow. And they didn't have enough trucks to come in and clear the stuff. They were busy in the city. So we slept at the arena. But we made sure that tons of food came in, pizza, all kinds of stuff, so that you could feed the folks who were trapped in the arena.
The snow accumulation would shut down schools and many businesses near Richfield for a few days. But it was nothing compared to what would come to Ohio and the Midwest 2.5 weeks later. Dubbed the White Hurricane, a historic winter storm would arrive in the Ohio Valley, Great Lakes area on January 25th. Tim Taylor remembers driving in to anchor the news on WJW-TV 8 in Cleveland when the storm arrived.
I don't think I drove over 20 miles an hour because you couldn't see more than 2 feet in front of you. And sometimes the wind, which hit 80 miles an hour, you couldn't even see that far. So, luckily because I was anchoring and it's a second shift job, the traffic is normally lighter anyway. This was a double white knuckle drive, wondering if your car was going to slide into a snowdrift on 77 or, into a path of an 18-wheeler.
The storm would feature some of the lowest barometric pressure readings ever recorded in the continental United States. The blizzard began its peak run in Cleveland the morning of January 26th. Wind gusts reached as high as 82 miles per hour as visibility was near zero. Wind chills dropped below minus 50 degrees.
We had a front row seat from the second floor of the newsroom there at 55th and South Marginal, now Dick Goddard Way, watching the cars and the trucks and the lights on I-90 were less than 100 yards away, and they were barely visible. And more often than not, the huge windows on the second floor where our newsroom is, they were covered with ice and snow driven by those gale force winds coming off the lake. So, looking back at the 40 years I drove downtown through every kind of weather over the years, that was by far the worst travel ever.
It would go down as one of the worst winter storms to ever hit the region. Schools, businesses, and transportation halted for days. Over the years, it would become known as the Great Blizzard of 1978. The storm was so severe, the Ohio Turnpike had to be shut down. Sadly, 51 people lost their lives as a result of the storm. More than 5,000 National Guard members were called in to help.
It shut down everything for a few days, but when it was over, and then they were cleaning up. It took a while, but the storm moved out fairly quickly. It was I think it was a couple of days, but still, I mean, you can imagine the mess that it left. And I'm thinking, there are people trapped in cars. The National Guard had to rescue people. I think I remember there was a truck driver who survived for about a week. I think down in the Mansfield area, down in that area, I think he was eating or drinking snow to stay alive. Yeah, it was insane. It was pretty crazy.
As the blizzard of 1978 was wrapping up, as was Kiss's Alive 2 tour in the United States, the band would head overseas in March for 5 sold-out shows at Tokyo's Budokan Arena. Later in 1978, the band was so big, each member released their own highly anticipated solo album. However, for some, that marked a turning point for the band. In 1980, Kiss would go unmasked, which truly marked the end of an era, says longtime fan Cahill.
Before 78, they were the show. Their movement, their energy on stage, they were the show, and they just happened to have effects and bombs and stuff going off as a backdrop. By 79, they were completely, they were relying on all the effects, and they weren't as much the show. They weren't putting out the same level of energy. 78 was like a transition period. There was still some energy on stage, but they were starting to rely on all the gadgets and trickery. Where for me, when they were truly great, was when that stuff just supported what they were doing and the energy they had on stage.
Kiss continues to perform today, with different members alongside Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. The band even streamed a massive New Year's Eve concert in Dubai in 2020. Still, by most measures and fan recollections, 1978 stands as the biggest period of Kiss. And yet, Gene Simmons has his own surprising take on what represents peak Kiss to him.
Peak might be the very first tour. And that's because when you're young, you don't know anything, you do really stupid things. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to start breathing fire at every show. Now we're approaching our 50th year soon. You don't think of I'm going to be doing that when I'm 71. Yep. So peak was the early days when you throw caution to the wind and you dive into the deep end of the pool when you're not even sure you can swim. That's what rock is. That's when it's peak. That's when it's take no prisoners. We were doing 240 shows that first year. We toured 6 days we did shows 6 days out of the week, and sometimes 2 shows a day. Got into the back of a station wagon, 2 guys slept in the back, and 2 guys sat up front. And we would travel 10 hours between shows and go in and put on these, well, in my case, all leather outfits that were standing in the corner because of all the sweat and everything, and it was cold out, so that it would become rigid. You literally couldn't bend them over, if you know what I mean. So they'd have to heat it up on the heater, and it would smell like your asshole unwiped, because between the saddle soap and the leather softener and my sweat, it was just like I crawled out of Satan's ass. Those were if you're talking about peak, that's the peak. When it didn't matter how tired you were doing God's work. It was electric church. You were on a crusade. You were just like, I don't have to do a 9 to 5. God bless. For the glorious sum total of $75 a week.
That's it for this episode of CLE Rocks. For more, visit our pages on Acast, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and other platforms. I'm Troy L. Smith. Until next time.